Pretty cool announcement in the Flutter Dart space. Just read about it yesterday, perused the internet as much as I could to find out as much as I can. There's not a lot out there right now, but I'm going to try and summarize as much as I've found. It's called Fluorite. It is a game engine that is built using Flutter as well as some other pieces that kind of brings the best of both worlds to us. Right now, there's a pretty popular game engine called Flame, but it's a 2D game engine. You know, pixel art and various other kind of things have been built in. I've used it. I have lots of content on it. It's really cool. This is a 3D game engine, though. Now, the things you're seeing here aren't being rendered by Flutter itself. But you can essentially have all the Flutter parts of the UI and everything can talk together without weird hooks. And it is a really cool developer workflow if you like Flutter and widget trees because it's a very similar pattern. All right, so this is kind of a deck I've put together that summarizes everything about it that I know so far. So who's building this? Well, it's being built by, and it's going to be used in Toyota cars. That was the main thing here, and we'll get into some details on their process to go this direction. So it's being built in partnership with Toyota itself, as well as and I'm not sure how much of a role this is, but Very Good Ventures, who've made many big Flutter packages and workflows and ecosystems, including things like Very Good CLI and Dart Frog. They are involved in this too. So something that's cool is Flutter's actually already being used in production cars. The 2026 Toyota RAV4 uses a Flutter-based infotainment system. So it's not this that we're talking about here, but it's kind of like a step below this, used for all their UI. And what they really specialize in doing is making Flutter work really well in embedded systems. So things like Raspberry Pis or something that would run in your car that maybe you'd normally run something like Android on. So just to kind of see the process of what this team has gone through to evaluate the options, looking at things like Unity and Unreal, the fact that it was closed source was, definitely an issue in the licensing fees. And if this is something that's going to be in millions of cars, Unity, although is great, becomes very expensive when you're, paying for a lot of people using it. I forget the exact numbers and economics of how Unity works, but it's can get expensive. They also looked into using Godot, but there's a long startup on that. And for a car, you kind of need it to start up right away. You might need to turn your heat on the second you get in the car. Now that they're getting rid of all these buttons, and I don't like that. I want my buttons and knobs. It is, a problem if it takes 20 seconds to start up. Using Flutter directly and with Impeller, it's only stable right now on iOS. It's unstable, at least at the time of doing the research for Linux, Mac OS, Windows, and Android. There was too many issues. This is an important thing. You are not just building like an app that someone's going to download on their phone. This is something that's going to run in your car and run certain aspects of your car in theory. So it needs to really work. So what they've done is they've built at least the start of something called Fluorite. So it's built on top of the tech already being used in their production cars. It's open source or will be open source. The intention is open source, and I think it's just kind of like a timing thing because there's a lot of work to properly open source something. It's not like you just, we'll make the repo public. Like there's a lot of documentation, workflow stuff you have to put in for pull requests. It's not as easy as just like clicking a button and calling yourself open source. So this is cool. This is what they're using. So what is it? So it's a game engine, not just a Flutter package. You write everything in Dart. You can drop widgets. You get 3D. Awesome. Cool. So these are the three ingredients we already had, that Toyota already had. Flutter on embedded, so using their existing solution with the 2026 Toyota. They're already doing this stuff using something called Yocto Linux underneath it. I don't know too much about that version of Linux, but I love Linux, so I'm sure it's great, and I'm sure they made the right decision there. So there's Flutter SDL3, which is a cross-platform I/O layer, enabling Flutter on embedded devices, desktops, and console. So that's a mix of Dart and C++. And then using Google Filament, which is Google's open source, physically based 3D rendering engine. It's a Vulkan backend, which is stuff for like GPU rendering and shaders and all that kind of stuff. It's mobile first, but it's cross-platform. So the way it kind of works is you would have your game code and UI all written in Dart with widgets and state management and however you want to do it. Then there's the Fluorite engine, which gives a Fluorite view, which has like a scene graph and it has touch zones. And then there's a high performance C++ core. It all goes out to Filament and this SDL3 and then uses the Vulkan GPU with hardware acceleration and all the good stuff. Cool. So following sort of Flutter principles and stuff where it's all just widgets, Fluorite View is just another widget. Um, what's cool about it, it doesn't replace your Flutter app. It is just a widget inside your Flutter app that could take up the whole screen if you wanted, or it could just take up a part. And in fact, I believe you can have multiple instances of or different Fluorite views that are essentially showing different scenes or different angles from a scene. Like imagine like a security screen where you have 4 different cameras. Like that's the kind of stuff that is possible. Um, so we have that. Yeah, multiple simultaneous 3D views, shared state between the game and the UI. So you can use Provider, you can use Riverpod, Block. They're all just going to work, which is really cool. And I am familiar with this pain point in using Flame for a game I've been sort of making on the side. Um, there's kind of like working in the game engine part and then working in the Flutter part. And there are bridges and stuff to, let these things talk to each other. But my app, for instance, my game uses Flutter a lot. It's not just for like a main menu. There's a lot of like doing stuff with inventory and all these kinds of things. So I've, hodgepodge and things together and it works fine, but it still feels a little bit, anytime you have to like cross connect between these things, it feels a little bit annoying. And I'm hoping, from what I understand about this, it's going to be very seamless and just feel like you're, building a Flutter app. So there's familiar patterns. Your existing game dev knowledge will transfer, which is cool. They're not just like reinventing the wheel here. They're using, patterns and stuff that both Flutter people will be familiar with, but also if you're using something like, Unity or Godot or any of the other game engines in the current landscape, it's going to feel familiar. I'll bring this up here. This is just kind of I took this from their website and just zoomed it in pretty big. But this is a widget tree, and you have something called an entity, which you can then have multiple components on it. So things like the transform, which allows you to say where is it in the XYZ space. You can add colliders. You can actually add the visual model, some options on what's renderable. And then they have, things like behavior scripts. So it kind of has a life cycle. When it's created, run this code. When it's updated, run this code. This seems pretty cool to me. Like I've used Unity a lot in the past, and what I dislike about it, and I'm not putting it down, it's just my kind of flow. I don't like how I have to keep navigating around through like UI and toggling things down and right-clicking on things. Like I personally prefer this kind of approach, and it's also what I do in Flame. There's no GUI for Flame. It's really just writing code, and this is just what I like because it's what I do when I make apps. So yeah, what's going to be working with this? Well, hot reload. You're going to have hot reload. Cool. That makes sense. That's a huge pro of Flutter, and I think if they ship this without hot reload, people would probably complain. There's going to be these touch trigger zones, so artists can essentially create clickable areas, and they can do it in like meta layers in programs like Blender. So the artist can, kind of be like, this is interactive or clickable, and the devs can, hook into those kinds of things. We have physically based rendering. It supports open formats. So whether that's like GLTF files, GLB models, like anything you can kind of open in Blender seems like it's going to carry over to here, which is cool. And then, yeah, I mentioned state already. We're going to have state sharing between the two sort of sides of the application. And there's, yeah, a shader pipeline. If you don't know what that is, look that stuff up. That's what makes stuff look really cool. Whether it's like shadows, water effects, reflections, lighting, that kind of stuff. Shaders. All right, so The cross-platform here is they're obviously focusing on embedded Linux because that is the production need for this, as well as just running on Linux desktop and Mac OS, and that all works, or at least is like actively testing or the primary target. Um, Android, iOS, Windows, and game consoles. From the talk I watched, it seems like it's all going to work there. Maybe they haven't like made it perfectly performant or whatever, but there doesn't seem to be any issues there. Web was brought up by a questioner in the talk, and from my take on it, on her response, um, it almost just seems like it's something they haven't really dug into. I don't think they've said like, oh, it's really hard or oh, it's going to be easy. It's just kind of like hasn't really been researched. My take on it is I'm sure it's going to end up working at least in like Chrome once they put probably a bit of work into it. Uh, because it can, use the WebAssembly sort of target and all that kind of stuff. I don't know enough about the deeper technical, especially on like the 3D rendering side. But this working in a browser, I think, is going to be, super awesome if they're able to do that because. I love web applications. And if we can have a web application that's performant and allows us to use Flutter and a 3D engine, think of like the experiences we could easily make without users having to download an app. So things that are coming next on this, well, next I guess first is like let's get them to open source this thing so we can actually try it out. I'm definitely gonna do a video once I can get my hands on this and make some cool things. But yeah, they talked about in the talk some Jolt physics integration. So right now there's no physics engine. It's just about the rendering, and you could write your own logic for physics, but that's going to come, and that is awesome because we love physics. Building different tooling with CLI and even like probably a GUI they're going to launch for doing the tooling. Yeah, open source release I already mentioned, and they're going to be looking for collaboration from other engineering teams. There'll be a Dart API for SDL3. And they're exploring accessibility. In the talk, they mentioned they just haven't really explored it yet, but because of the nature of how Flutter works and how you can add, accessibility nodes and or widgets or whatever you want to call them, I feel like that's going to be totally fine. Like 100% it'll be totally fine for at least the UI part. I'm curious what would be needed, to make it work on the 3D part of this. So, why does this matter? So, aside from it being super cool use of tech, it's going to give Flutter devs a path to get into 3D without, learning new software and new tool chains and new languages. You already know Dart, you know, cool. Um, and yeah, game devs are going to get the Flutter UI toolkit. So on the other side of the coin, a huge pain point in making games is building the UI. Maybe it's gotten better, but I know in the past when I was pretty big into Unity, like there was plugins and stuff to do it, but it always looked terrible because it has to render it in 3D. At least at the time of me dealing with that. Flutter is the best thing in the world, in my opinion, for making menus and UI that is responsive and dynamic and has 60 frames a second. So cool, Flutter is getting the game stuff, and game stuff is getting the Flutter. Yay! Um, so this is also like a great use case. Automotive being an anchor use case. It's not just like, oh, we made a game engine and it's a phone app you can get. Like this is something that, users are going to use without even knowing what it is, which, kind of makes sense. Most people driving a car aren't going to be thinking that. Now I am 100% going to buy a Toyota as my next car just to have this in it because I think it's the right thing to do for my channel and for my fans. Right. And then, yeah, this is like a real alternative proprietary engine. Yeah, it's going to be a lot smaller scale than Godot and like Unity and these various other things. But I'm hoping it going open source, Unity's closed source, for example, we'll see a lot of collaboration in the community and people adding things, and we'll get all the things we expect. Physics engines, I don't know what they're doing about audio and music and that kind of stuff, but that's a big part of game engines too, is dealing with that. Lighting, I don't even know. I know there already is lighting, but I don't know how powerful it is. We'll find out. But yeah, it's nice to have another option out there. So yeah, let's keep an eye on this. I put some links in the description down there for fluorite.game, which is the official site. It's very basic right now. I think I have it open here. But if you're coming to this video in the future, there might be a lot more here, as well as hopefully a link to the GitHub repo, or repos. There'll probably be multiple. Um, then there's this talk. I highly recommend, if this is interesting to you, watch the talk. I think it's like 20, maybe 30 minutes. Super insightful. It's definitely the most information I was able to get about this by watching that. GitHub repo. Can't wait. I'll, if when they release it, I'll update the description with this link in here to save you, from finding it. And then you can also look up Google Filament, which is the rendering solution under the rendering for the 3D part. Obviously, Flutter is the rendering, doing all the rendering and whatnot. Okay, cool. So I'll leave it with that. Let me know in the comments if you're excited for this, if you think it's something that you would use, or just something that maybe makes the Flutter ecosystem better, or if you think this is stupid and, people should just be learning a game engine that already exists. I'd love to argue with you. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.